introduce yourself to the court.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ashford DeRosa.
And what do you do for a living, Dr. DeRosa?
Well, currently, I'm a tenured professor at Midland State University in the Health Policy and Management Department. I'm also a co-director at the Midland Center for Responsible Gun Policy. We're a non-profit organization that aims to provide accurate information to the public regarding gun violence and its prevention.
And how are you involved in today's case?
Well, I was hired by Hayden Duran to conduct research into an incident that occurred on August 18th of 2010. I'm here to testify about how the park stored their firearm, how firearm accidents occur, and the likelihood of firearm accidents in this case.
Now, before we get to your conclusions, I'd like to talk about your qualifications. What education have you received?
Well, I received my master's in public health from Tufts University and my PhD in health policy from Midland State. Most of my graduate training focused on research methods and statistics, and I've actually directed several of my own studies regarding safe gun storage and how it affects prevention of gun accidents.
Now, are you published in your field?
I certainly am. I've published over 30 articles in scientific, peer-reviewed journals, including the National Pediatric Policy Journal. If you're not familiar with it, it's one of the foremost journals on firearm mechanics and safety.
And have you been retained as an expert in any previous cases?
Yes, I have. I've been retained as an expert in 15 cases prior and called to testify in 3 of those.
Now, what information did you review in coming to your opinions in today's case?
Well, along with reviewing numerous articles and reports on safe firearm storage and maintenance, as well as my own research, I reviewed several witness statements, those of Danny Brooks, Hayden Duran, and Andy Park. And I also looked at some photographs and diagrams of the park home, filing cabinet, and firearm safe combination as they appeared on August 18th.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to come to the conclusions you did?
I certainly did.
And did you use reliable principles and methods commonly practiced in your field?
I did. I used the methods enumerated in many peer-reviewed studies that both I and my colleagues rely on regularly.
And did you apply those methods reliably?
Yes.
Dr. DeRosa, what conclusions did you reach in the course of your investigation?
Well, I was able to conclude that the steps Mr. and Ms. Park took in storing the firearm were not sufficient to prevent any harm that might have occurred. They made 2 specific errors when it came to storing their firearm. First, with the placement of their firearm safe. And second, and more importantly, how they chose to store the combination to this safe.
I'd like to talk about that first error you mentioned. How should a firearm owner store their firearm?
Well, in a location inaccessible to anyone not intended to use it.
And is that a precaution parks took?
Only to a certain degree. And choosing to store the weapon in a locked safe, as the Parks did, is entirely proper. However, the Parks chose to store this safe in their bedroom, which was accessible to their daughter Sydney, and they kept it there even after Andy Park was made aware Sydney knew the location and contents of the safe. And this was only especially concerning when paired with the family's treatment of the combination to the safe.
Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that combination. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness with defenses C and D?
Permission granted. Thank you.
Now, how should a firearm owner store the combination to their safe?
Well, actually, it's recommended that the combination is memorized. If a firearm owner does choose to store a hard copy of the combination, it should be in a location, once again, inaccessible to anyone not intended to use the firearm.
And is that a precaution that the Parks took?
No. The Parks stored their firearm safe combination, as we can see here, on a paper with only 3 numbers written in combination format. Now, they kept this combination in a folder marked for emergencies only. And they kept this folder in an unlocked filing drawer in their unlocked office, which was problematic.
Why is that problematic?
Well, Sydney Park and Jessie Duran, the 2 children I found who often played in the Park home, had constant access to this office drawer. Andy Park knew that Sydney often played in this office and looked in this drawer, and that she knew all of the family's important information was stored there.
Your Honor, permission to approach the witness and retrieve defenses C and D.
Permission granted.
Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about storage of bullets. How should a firearm owner store bullets?
Well, bullets should always be stored in a location separate from the firearm itself. If bullets were ever to be stored near or with the firearm, the chances of fatal accident in the home would most certainly be increased.
And why is that?
If someone not intended to access the firearm, like a child, was able to do so, if there were no bullets nearby, that person is much less likely to be able to load the firearm. An unloaded firearm, in turn, poses less risk of a fatal accident, since no bullet can be expelled.
Dr. DeRosa, in your expert opinion, what was the overall impact of these errors that the parks made?
Had those errors back to the safing combination I mentioned been corrected prior to August 18th, the chances of a fatal accident that day would have been decreased.
And Dr. DeRosa, you also mentioned a few minutes ago being asked to research how firearm accidents occur. How common are these accidents?
Certainly, firearm accidents account for over 600 fatalities every year. That's nearly 2 fatalities a day. We most commonly see them occur amongst children ages 10 to 14, as these children are old enough to be curious about firearms, but less likely than adults to have received any formal training or experience with firearms.
Dr. DeRosa, taking this into account, what was your overall conclusion in today's case?
Taking that into account, as well as how these accidents can occur with accidental compression of the trigger. What I mean by that is someone handling a loaded firearm who trips or even drops the firearm can result in a firearm accident. And that's because the weight of the firearm itself is often enough to compress the trigger. Now, taking all of that into consideration, the circumstances of Sydney Park's death...
Objection, Your Honor. Narrative. Witnesses are not answering the opposing counsel's question.
I believe she's giving her expert opinion, and I'm going to allow it to continue. However, if you feel that it is, it continues to be non-responsive, then I would object in that fashion.
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is overruled.
So, taking into account how common these firearm accidents are, as well as how they occur, what was your overall conclusion in today's case?
I concluded that the circumstances surrounding Sydney Park's death were consistent with an accident that would have been less likely to occur had the Parks taken increased safety measures with the storage of the firearm and the combination.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.